Something about you broke more than you realize. And I'm not saying that with ego, I'm saying it with truth. You didn't hurt them by being loud. You didn't break them by talking too much. You broke them by surviving what was meant to finish you. Some people expected you to fold, to stay where they left you, to need their approval forever, but you didn't. You kept moving quietly, patiently. And that shift, that's what shook them. This speech is for anyone who's ever been misunderstood, underestimated, or counted out. For anyone who walked away without explaining themselves. For anyone who chose growth over revenge. Let's talk about why your evolution hit harder than you think. Most people think power looks like noise. They think strength shows up as raised voices, long messages, final conversations that stretch late into the night. They believe if something ends, it has to explode first. Tears on the table, words thrown like punches, a need to explain every feeling so nobody misunderstands where you're coming from. That's the script people expect you to follow when a relationship cracks, when loyalty shifts, when respect gets tested. They expect you to fight to be understood, to plead your case, to stand there asking for clarity like you owe them one last performance. But you didn't do that. You didn't beg, you didn't chase closure, you didn't demand answers from people who already showed you who they were. You chose something most people don't have the discipline to choose. You chose dignity. You chose silence. You chose to walk away without dragging the situation through the mud just to feel heard. And that decision hit harder than any argument ever could. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence is control. It takes strength to not react when your ego wants to speak. It takes maturity to leave without slamming the door. A lot of people only feel powerful when they see your emotions spill out, when they know they still have access to your energy. When you don't give them that, when you remove yourself cleanly, it creates a different kind of tension, one they can't escape from. There's real psychology behind this. Human attachment isn't just about presence, it's about access. Studies on emotional attachment show that when someone loses access to you without confrontation, without resolution, without a final emotional exchange, the brain keeps looping the moment. No reaction creates more discomfort than conflict. Conflict gives people something to respond to. Silence gives them nothing but themselves. They're forced to sit alone with their own behavior, replaying scenes, wondering what you saw that made you leave so calmly. Think about how rare that actually is. Most people can't resist the urge to explain themselves. They want to be right. They want to be validated. They want the other person to admit fault. But you didn't need that. You trusted your instincts enough to move on without approval. That's a different level of self-respect. Picture a real-life moment. A coworker constantly undermines you. Subtle comments, credit taken in meetings, a tone that suggests you're not enough. They assume you stay right there, trying to prove your worth, working harder just to earn respect that should have been automatic. They expect you to complain or confront them so they can twist the story. Instead, you level up. You sharpen your skills. You change your environment, new role, new circle, new focus, no announcement, no bitterness, just distance. That's when it hits them. Not immediately, but slowly. They look around and realize you're no longer there to compete with. No longer there to react to their energy, no longer available to play the role they assigned you, and that absence is louder than any speech you could have given. They replay the moment over and over, the last interaction, the last time they thought they had the upper hand. They expected a scene, they expected you to push back. Instead, you removed yourself like you already knew your value. That kind of confidence unsettles people because it suggests you saw the situation clearly, long before you ever left. Walking away without begging sends a message words never could. It says you're not confused. It says you're not desperate. It says you don't need to convince anyone of your worth. And for people who built their sense of importance on how much you needed them, that realization cuts deep. A lot of people mistake emotional reactions for power. They think whoever cares the most loses. But the truth is, whoever controls their response controls the situation. You didn't suppress your feelings. You just didn't hand them to someone who didn't deserve them. That's emotional intelligence. That's discipline. And here's the part most people don't talk about. When you walk away clean, you also protect your future self. You don't have to regret what you said in anger. You don't have to wish you handled it differently. You leave with your integrity intact. That peace follows you. It sharpens your focus. It keeps your energy clean for the next chapter. People expect you to leave bruised and loud. They expect you to drag the pain behind you like proof that it mattered. But you understood something deeper. Not everything deserves a reaction. Not everyone deserves closure. Sometimes the most powerful move is recognizing when the lesson is already complete. And that's why it broke them more than you realize. Not because you tried to hurt them, not because you played games, but because you showed restraint in a world addicted to reaction. You demonstrated that you value yourself enough to walk away without asking anyone to validate your decision. That kind of move stays with people. Long after the conversations fade, long after the roles reverse, long after they realize the access they lost wasn't temporary. You didn't leave angry. You left aligned. And alignment doesn't make noise, it just moves forward. There was a time when their opinion carried weight. You felt it in the way you moved, the way you spoke, the way you second-guessed your decisions. You checked the room before you trusted your own instincts. You looked for signs, for approval, for reassurance that you were doing the right thing. Their acknowledgement felt like fuel. A nod from them made you feel like you were on the right path. And there's no shame in that, because at some point, most people start there. Validation is the training wheels. It helps you balance before you learn how to ride on your own. But then something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was internal. You stopped asking people to confirm what you already knew. You stopped waiting for permission to move forward. You started validating yourself quietly, privately, consistently. And that moment changed the entire dynamic. Because self-dimension is dangerous to people who survive off your doubt. Some people don't actually believe in you. They believe in the version of you that needs them. They feel important when you look to them for answers, when your confidence depends on their reaction. That's where their power comes from. So when you stop feeding that system, when you stop outsourcing your worth, the structure collapses. When you no longer need permission, control disappears. When you stop asking to be chosen, you choose yourself. And that choice makes people uncomfortable. Behavioral psychology backs this up. Studies show that people feel threatened when someone they once influenced becomes independent. It disrupts the hierarchy they were comfortable with. They're used to being the reference point, used to being the voice you check in with. When that stops, they don't just lose influence, they lose identity. And instead of asking themselves why, they often project that discomfort onto you. And that's why the energy changes. You'll notice it in small ways first. The encouragement gets quieter. The support becomes conditional. The same people who used to hype you up when your dreams felt safe suddenly stop clapping when the results start showing. Not because you changed, but because you no longer need their applause to keep going. Think about that friend who loved you when you talked about ideas but went silent when those ideas turned into action. They were comfortable with potential. Potential doesn't threaten anyone. Potential stays hypothetical. But execution, independence, results, that forces comparison, that forces reflection. And not everyone is ready for that mirror. So instead of celebrating you, they distance themselves. Instead of supporting you, they minimize what you've built. They say you're lucky. They say you got help. They say it's not that deep. Anything to protect the version of reality where they still feel superior. What they don't realize is that you're not doing this to prove anything. You're doing it because you finally trust yourself. There's a different kind of peace that comes with that. When you stop seeking validation, your decisions get clearer. You're not pulled in 10 directions by opinions. You don't stall waiting for reassurance. You move with intention. You listen more to your inner voice than outside noise. And that alignment sharpens you. People can feel that. They feel it when you don't over-explain anymore. They feel it when you don't argue for your worth. They feel it when you don't shrink to make them comfortable. And for some, that's inspiring. For others, it's threatening. Real life shows this over and over. Athletes who stop playing for praise and start playing for mastery reach another level. Entrepreneurs who stop chasing applause and start building systems create longevity. Artists who stop asking if their work is good enough and start expressing truth develop a voice that can't be ignored. The common thread isn't talent, it's internal validation. When you validate yourself, you stop negotiating with fear. You don't need constant feedback to stay disciplined. You don't need external motivation to stay consistent. That's when your work ethic becomes dangerous, because nobody can take it from you. Nobody can turn it off. And this is where it really breaks people. They were used to you checking in, used to you asking, what do you think? Used to you adjusting based on their reaction. When that stops, they feel invisible. And instead of admitting they depended on that dynamic, they tell themselves, you've changed, that you distant, that you different now. They write about one thing: you are different. You're no longer auditioning for a role in someone else's life. You're writing your own script. You're no longer looking outside for confirmation. You've built an internal standard. And that standard doesn't fluctuate based on mood, opinions, or approval. That independence shattered the image they had of you. Not the real you, but the version that fit comfortably into their expectations. The version that stayed small enough to be non-threatening. The version that needed them. And once that image breaks, it can't be put back together. Because you can't unlearn self-trust. You can't unknow your worth. Once you realize you don't need permission to become who you're meant to be, you move differently forever. Your pace changes, your circle changes, your priorities change. And the people who benefited from your self-doubt feel that loss deeply. Not because you abandoned them, not because you became arrogant, but because you stopped handing them the keys to your confidence. That's the quiet revolution. No announcements, no speeches, just a shift in where your power comes from. And once it comes from within, nobody can leverage it against you ever again. This is the part most people can't handle, because it doesn't fit the story they told themselves about you. When someone hurts you, betrays you, doubts you, or tries to limit you, there's an expectation that you'll come out damaged. They expect the pain to harden you, to make you sharp in the wrong ways. They assume you'll carry bitterness like armor, that you'll move through life defensive, cold, suspicious, ready to strike back. That's the version of growth they understand. Pain in, poison out. But that's not what happened with you. You didn't become cold. You didn't become cruel. You didn't become what hurt you. You healed. And healing without bitterness is rare. It's powerful because it removes the narrative that you were ever broken. It shows that what you went through didn't define you, didn't own you, didn't get the final say. A lot of people can survive pain. Very few can process it, extract the lesson, and still keep their heart intact. That's a different level of strength. Most people expect pain to turn into anger. They expect trauma to create sharp edges. When it doesn't, it exposes something uncomfortable for them. It reveals that you were never weak. You were tested. And you passed without losing your character. There's science behind this too. Psychological research on resilience shows that people who process adversity without developing chronic resentment tend to have stronger emotional regulation, clearer decision-making, and higher long-term success. Bitterness narrows perception. Healing expands it. When you chose healing, you didn't just protect your peace. You protected your future. And here's where it starts to confuse people. Someone wrongs you, disrespects you, doubts your ability. Maybe they lied, maybe they took advantage, maybe they tried to define you by your lowest moment. In their mind, that damage is permanent. They expect to see it show up in your tone, your attitude, your posture. They expect you to drag that pain into every room, every conversation, every relationship after them. But you don't. You show up calm, focused, respectful, still disciplined. Your energy isn't heavy. Your presence isn't bitter. You're not walking around trying to prove how much you were hurt. You're not throwing shade. You're not replaying the past out loud. You've done the work quietly. And that quiet healing throws people off more than anger ever could. Because anger makes sense to them. Anger confirms their belief that you were damaged. Anger lets them say, see, I got to them. But peace messes with their story. Peace suggests you processed what happened and kept moving. Peace suggests the issue wasn't you. That realization is hard to swallow. There's a moment when they look at you and realize you're not carrying what they handed you. The weight they tried to put on your back never stayed there. Instead of being bitter, you became better. Instead of becoming guarded, you became grounded. And that forces them to confront something they were avoiding. Their behavior didn't have the power they thought it did. You didn't let the experience turn you into a smaller person. You let it refine you. That takes maturity. Healing requires accountability. It requires you to look at your own blind spots, your own patterns, without turning self-reflection into self-hate. It means admitting something hurt without letting it define your identity. A lot of people don't do that work. They carry wounds like trophies. You didn't. You carried lessons, and lessons make you lighter. When you grow without bitterness, you move through life differently. You're not reactive. You don't assume everyone is out to get you. You don't bleed on people who didn't cut you. That emotional cleanliness shows. People feel safe around you. They feel your presence before you speak. And that presence is powerful because it's earned. Real life proves this over and over. The person who forgives without reconnecting. The person who learns without holding grudges. The person who upgrades their mindset without announcing their healing journey. Those are the ones who go the furthest. Not because they ignored the pain, but because they refused to let it poison their future. And this is where it really breaks. The people who wronged you, they expected to live rent-free in your head, expected to be the reason you changed in a negative way, expected your success to be fueled by revenge. Instead, they became irrelevant. Not because you erased the memory, but because you processed it. And processed pain doesn't control you anymore. You didn't heal to make them feel guilty. You didn't heal to prove a point. You healed because you valued your peace more than their power. That's why your growth feels different to people. It's clean, it's steady, it's not aggressive. And because it's not fueled by anger, it's sustainable. You're not running on adrenaline, you're running on clarity. People notice that. They notice when you're unbothered in situations that used to trigger you. They notice when you respond instead of react. They notice when your discipline stays intact regardless of who's watching. And that level of emotional control is intimidating to anyone who thought they had access to your inner world. You didn't become heartless, you became healed. You didn't lose empathy, you gained boundaries. You didn't forget what happened, you learned from it. And that's why your presence confuses people who expected you to fall apart. Because when pain didn't turn you into poison, it exposed the truth. The problem was never your weakness. The problem was their inability to break your spirit. Anybody can shine for a moment. Anybody can get excited, talk big, post progress, and feel unstoppable at the start. The beginning is loud. The beginning has energy. The beginning has support. But consistency is different. Consistency doesn't care about hype. Consistency doesn't need applause. Consistency is what separates what's real from what's temporary. And that's where most people fall off. They thought your motivation was emotional. They thought you were running off a feeling. They thought once that feeling faded, you would fade with it. They assumed you'd cool off, that real life would hit, that boredom would set in, that pressure would expose you. Time has a way of breaking people who aren't anchored, and they expected time to break your discipline the same way it broke theirs. But it didn't. You kept showing up, not in a dramatic way, not making noise, not demanding attention. You showed up when nobody was watching. You showed up on the days when motivation was gone and all that was left was commitment. You showed up tired. You showed up uncertain. You showed up anyway, day after day, quiet progress, no shortcuts. That's the part people didn't calculate. Data doesn't lie. Studies on habit formation and goal pursuit show that most people quit within the first 30 days. They start strong, then life intervenes. Less than 10% stay consistent long term. 10%. That's not because the other 90% lack talent. It's because consistency requires identity, not emotion. When you stayed the course, you didn't just make progress, you became rare. And rarity changes perception. At first, people laughed. They joked about your plans. They treated your vision like a phase. Starting a business, getting in shape, changing your mindset, building something from scratch. They smiled politely, waiting for the moment you'd go back to who you used to be. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were projecting their own experiences. Every time they tried and quit, they assumed you would too. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. Weeks passed, you were still locked in. Months passed, you were still disciplined. Setbacks came, you adjusted instead of stopping. You didn't announce a struggle. You didn't ask for sympathy. You didn't argue with doubters. You let the work speak. That silence, paired with consistency, is unsettling to people who rely on excuses. Because consistency removes all the comfortable explanations. When you keep showing up, people can't say it was luck. They can't say it was hype. They can't say you just had a good run. Time exposes the truth. And the truth was that you weren't chasing motivation, you were building structure. You weren't reacting to emotions, you were honoring a commitment to yourself. That's why they're watching now. The same person who laughed at the idea is studying your results. The same voice that questioned your discipline is quiet, not because you proved them wrong with words, but because you outlasted the doubt. You didn't win by being louder. You won by being steadier. Consistency has a way of forcing people to confront their own choices. When they see you still going, it reminds them of the times they stopped. The gym membership they wasted, the business idea they never followed through on, the goals they abandoned once it got uncomfortable. Your discipline becomes a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see in it. That's why the energy shifts. Some people get inspired, they ask questions, they want to learn. Others get distant, they minimize your progress. They say things like, must be nice, or not everyone has time for that. Those aren't observations, those are defenses. It's easier to discredit your consistency than to admit they lacked it. But here's the truth. You weren't special, you were committed. You didn't have perfect conditions, you had priorities. You didn't have endless motivation, you had systems. You didn't wait for the right moment, you created momentum. Consistency compounds. Small actions repeated daily stack up in ways people don't notice until it's undeniable. That's why overnight success looks sudden to those who weren't paying attention. They didn't see the mornings you showed up tired. They didn't see the nights you chose discipline over comfort. They only see the result and assume it was easy. But you know better. You know how many times quitting felt reasonable. You know how many days stopping would have been justified. And you know how many times you kept going anyway? That's not talent. That's character. And character can't be debated. You didn't argue with doubters. You didn't defend your vision. You didn't waste energy convincing anyone. You outlasted. That kind of consistency builds authority, it builds trust, it builds self-respect. Every time you showed up when you didn't feel like it, you reinforced your identity as someone who finishes what they start. That identity is powerful. Once you see yourself that way, quitting stops being an option. People sense that. They sense that you're not experimenting anymore. You're not trying this out. You're living it. And that realization hits hard for anyone who expected you to fold, because it confirms what they didn't want to believe. You were serious. And seriousness, backed by consistency, is unstoppable. You didn't just stay in the game longer. You changed the game by refusing to leave. And that's why your presence carries weight now, not because you demanded respect, but because you earned it the only way that lasts, by showing up long after the excitement wore off. This is where it really hits, because this is the part nobody prepares for. People expect you to leave loudly. They expect revenge energy. They expect a campaign to show how much you've grown without them. They expect posts, captions, subtle messages designed to make them feel something. That's the normal script. When someone doubts you or walks away, the world teaches you to prove your worth by shoving success in their face. But you didn't do that. You didn't try to show them what they lost. You didn't post for attention. You didn't chase validation through success. You just lived. And living well, without looking back, is the loudest statement anyone can make. It doesn't scream. It doesn't explain. It doesn't ask to be understood. It just exists, steady and unbothered, moving forward, whether anyone is watching or not. That's what breaks people, because attention is currency. As long as someone knows you're checking for them, watching their moves, waiting for their reaction, they feel relevant, they feel important. The moment you stop doing that, the power dynamic shifts. When they realize you're not monitoring their life anymore, not measuring your progress against theirs, not holding space for their opinion, something uncomfortable settles in. That realization stings deeper than rejection. Rejection at least confirms significance. Being ignored confirms irrelevance. And nothing hits the ego harder than realizing you're no longer a factor in someone's decisions. There's a real life moment that captures this perfectly. Time passes quietly. No drama, no announcements. One day, curiosity creeps in. They look you up, expecting to see you where they left you. Maybe struggling, maybe still talking about the past, maybe still carrying the weight of what happened. They expect proof that they mattered more than they did. Instead, they see growth. They see peace. They see alignment. Your life looks fuller. Your energy looks calmer. Your direction looks clearer. And the hardest part isn't that you're doing well. It's that they're not part of it. No trace, no mention, no indirect messages. Just a life moving forward without reference to them. That moment lands heavy because it confirms something they didn't want to believe. You didn't move on to make them regret it. You moved on because you outgrew the version of yourself that stayed too long. That growth wasn't about revenge. It was about evolution. And evolution doesn't explain itself. When you stop trying to prove a point, your life becomes clean. There's no extra weight, no unnecessary audience. You're not curating success for validation. You're building a life that makes sense to you. That kind of authenticity can't be faked, and it can't be ignored. People notice the difference. They notice when your success isn't loud. They notice when your happiness isn't performative. They notice when you don't speak on the past anymore. Because most people tie their progress to someone else's opinion. You didn't. You detached from the need to be seen. And in doing so, you became untouchable. When you don't need anyone to acknowledge your growth, nobody can take it away from you. This level of moving on requires maturity. It requires you to let go of the fantasy that one day they'll understand, apologize, or finally see your value. You stopped waiting for that moment. You accepted that closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from distance. Sometimes it comes from choosing peace over explanation. And that choice changes everything. You stop living in reaction mode. You stop checking if your progress was noticeable. You stop measuring your healing by their awareness. You focused on alignment, on waking up and doing what needed to be done, on building a life that didn't revolve around old wounds. That's when your energy shifted. People can feel when you're no longer carrying unfinished business. Your presence is lighter. Your confidence isn't aggressive. It's grounded. You're not trying to prove that you're better. You're simply better than you used to be. And that growth speaks without saying a word. For the people who expected access forever, that silence is deafening. They thought they'd always have a window into your life, thought they could always check in, measure themselves against you, feel some sense of relevance. When that window closes, it forces them to confront something uncomfortable. The chapter ended without their input. And that's not disrespect, that's self-respect. You didn't erase them, you just stopped carrying them. You didn't rewrite the past, you just stopped living in it. And that decision freed up space for new opportunities, new relationships, new levels of focus. That's why your life feels different now. You're not running from anything. You're not trying to make a statement. You're not holding on to resentment disguised as motivation. You're just moving forward with intention. And that's the final shift that really hits. When people realize you didn't move on to win, you moved on because staying stuck no longer matched who you were becoming. That kind of growth doesn't need validation. It doesn't need witnesses. It just keeps going. And the ones who thought you'd always look back are left staring at a life that moved on without them. So if you've ever wondered why certain people act distant now, why they bring up the past, why your name still triggers emotion, understand this. Something about you broke them. Not because you tried to hurt them, but because you refused to break yourself anymore. And that's not arrogance. It's evolution. Stay disciplined, stay focused, stay real. Because the strongest flex isn't proving people wrong. It's becoming so aligned with your purpose that their opinion no longer lives rent-free in your mind.